In this video, I'm going to show you how I created this perfume scene in Blender. I'm going to walk you through the entire setup of how I created this studio photography set, the model, the texturing, the lighting, how I render it, and I also have a brief word on post-production. I hope you enjoy this video, and with that, let's get into it. Okay, let's jump into this scene breakdown. I'm going to use a little bit of an advanced workflow. I'm not going to go into the very details of modeling and some very basic stuff. On this one, I really want to focus on some advanced techniques again with texturing, with lighting. I'm going to show you some render setup stuff, and then I'll also briefly mention some post-production things that I'm working on. So yeah, a quick breakdown of the scene. Basically, all we have are these cubes that are going to be acting as kind of like our scene photography prop setup. They're going to have a simple concrete texture. And then I have these perfume bottles that I'm using from Grayscale Gorilla. You can go find tons of models out there. I'll also show you a super quick rough and dirty model that you could go to make this with, but I'm going to be using that. I'm going to also be using their concrete materials, their HDRIs. I've been loving Grayscale Gorilla's content. So yeah, I'm going to turn this back on. A quick overview breakdown. Basically what I have is I have 3 lights. So 1, 2, 3. That's the entirety of my lighting breakdown. I'm going to throw this empty back in my camera collection. So I have 3 lights, actual, plain lights that are in the scene. I also have an HDRI that's turned down pretty low. And then outside of that, it really just is a matter of creating kind of these concrete blocks, creating your scene composition, playing with the lighting, rendering it out, and then doing some post-production. So that's kind of the workflow that I want to kind of go over today. So let's just to give you the basic setup so that you could go make basically this exact same render. I'm going to go into top view. I'm just going to shift and right click over here to give us a point to start in. Let's make this grid array of cubes. I'm just going to do shift A, add in a cube. And I'm just going to scale this down. I'm going to bring it over here to just halfway make it close. Something that looks right. Close enough. And then I'm going to bring it back over with GX. And then what I did to make these cubes like this, really quickly, I'm just going to grab an array modifier, hit the array, hit the modifier button, press A, that'll pull it up. I didn't want them to be touching, so what I did was just adjusted that factor offset to be 1.01 and then changed it to 10. And that's going to give you your first row, and then basically just need to array this in the Y direction for Blender users. So I'm going to press A, or modifier A, add in another array. And instead of going in the X direction, I want to go in the Y. So 1.01, and then we're going to set this from being 2 to 10. And then yeah, that's basically your setup there. And then what I would probably do now is I would typically just, matter of fact, I'll just show you. I would shift D. I'm going to move this to a new collection called Trash. Because if I made a mistake, applied something that I didn't want to, I could go back and edit it. And then what I would do with this in your cubes, so let's just make a new collection for cubes new, just to show you guys how I got there. Because I don't want to have anything that you don't understand how I got there in this file. So yeah, I'm going to move this into the new into that collection by pressing M and just doing cubes new. That's going to be in there now. So then what I need to do basically is I need to apply this array modifier so that each of these are an individual object. So if I just do Control A while hovering on both of these, that's going to apply them. And then these are all still treated as one object. So I'm going to do P separate by loose parts. And then yeah, now it's going to make a cube for each of these areas. And then the other thing that I do is I want them to have a bevel, and I want it to be dynamic. I want to be able to control it. Another way you could alternatively do this is you can make a linked Alt-D instance of this, but because I wanted to be able to use an actual object later on down the road, I just did it this way. And so then what I would probably do, honestly, is I would go to this first cube, I would add a bevel modifier. I'm going to do period on my numpad key to zoom in on it. I am working in imperial units, so I'm just going to change this to inches. I think this is roughly a 7-inch cube. So for me, if I know my cube is 7-inch, my bevel is probably going to be something like, a 1/4 inch or even less. So let's do 0.025. I want it to be pretty tight, but it does need to have a small bevel so that it is more realistic. And then let's add 4 segments. And I might even bump that up to 0.05. Nope, I like it better, 0.025. And then yeah, all I would do now is I would do C to hold get the grab brush. I would use the middle mouse to deselect it. Also all these, the origin is still at the center point of this first cube. So if you just box select them, right click, and then go to set origin to geometry, hold Alt and click it. Now it's going to put them where you would expect. And then I would just grab all of your cubes here with the brush select, super quick and dirty. just like that. And then shift, grab this last one, Control L, P, for copy modifiers. So now all your things have a bevel. And the reason that I did that is if you go over here and look, some of these cubes, so for this one, for example, I had the concrete thing below it, but in a reference image, I saw how they kind of had these like concrete pavers, these little thinner sections underneath the cubes. So what I wanted to be able to do was go to like one of these, for example, Shift D, Z to bring it up. And then, you know, I could grab this top face with 3 and then do GZ to bring it down, but it would still keep my bevel parametric. And so I could basically make that whatever thickness, but my bevel would stay the same. So that was kind of my goal with that there. And then, yeah, once I did that, all I did was I added in my camera. So just to do that real quickly, let's add a new collection, new camera. In this one, I always add an empty. So the first thing I would do is add an empty sphere, and then we'll just set it here. I'm gonna do Shift S and put my cursor to the selected thing. So that's gonna place it right in the middle there. And then I'm gonna do Shift A, add in another camera just to show you. I would usually do Alt G or Alt R, RX90 to get it facing forward. And then I go into my top view. I always just do GY to bring it out. And then I parent it by Shift, pressing that, Control P, Object, Keep, Transform. So now this is now kind of a camera rig. If I move my thing here, I can rotate it around the specific point. So you see that over here, all I did was kind of set these perfume bottles on top and then rotate my camera. And the good thing about this is if you want to use the local X-axis, so like for example, if I rotate it, that's great. But then if I do RX, it's gonna not be rotating along the local axis. So if you press X twice, you're going to shift from the global to the local axis of this empty. And now you can keep your camera, you know, centered and rotated correctly. And that's how you kind of set up your camera movement. So yeah, that's the basic modeling setup. It's just some cubes. And then, you know, I just set dressed them by moving them up and down to whatever composition that I liked. I had a reference image that I was kind of working to. But yeah, that's basically the entirety of that. So I'm just going to delete these 2 collections that I made, and we're going to focus on the scene that I made here. Okay, so yeah, now you know how I made the cubes. You know how I set up the camera. You know, I parented it to this empty, and then basically just created, you know, this composition. So now let's kind of focus on the lighting in this scene. So I'm just going to go into the rendered view and show you what it looks like. So I'm going to also create a window here. This will be my rendered view, and this will be on solid. Okay. In this side, all I have is 3 lights. So if I go over here to my lighting, I could rename these. As a matter of fact, let's just do it. Key light. And then this light here. Oh, no. I think this is my key light. Yeah, it is. This light here, I'm going to call this label. And then this one, I'm going to call fill light. Okay. So let's just turn them off in order that I would, you know, kind of set them up. Also, you can see that if I turn off all these lights, I'm just going to turn off my overlays here so you can kind of see what this world looks like. I have an HDRI loaded in, so to do that, you would just go over here. I have if you go to the shader editor for the HDRI, I pulled out the saturation for this, so it shows like that node here. But if you just basically set up an HDRI, again, for textures and materials, I'm using Grayscale Gorilla. If you don't have access to them, Ambient CG is one of my favorites for HDRIs and for textures. You can find a really quick tutorial on how to set up a texture or an HDRI. So yeah, in this scene, I'm using an HDRI from Grayscale Gorilla. I have it set to 0.2 to just kind of be a backward or just a backfill type overall light. And I'm also using it for the reflections in the glass. So I'm going to go back to here. So yeah, I'm going to go into camera view. This is just from the, all the lights turned off, just the lighting from here. So if I turn this to 0, completely black. So I'm doing some overall basic light. I'm getting some highlights on your glass. I'm also using it for the reflection colors. Just some different detail in there. Okay, the first light I would talk about is your key light. I have it set to a very low spread. Oh, that's the wrong one here. If I grab this key light, it is set to 1. I'm also using a black body node to control the temperature. So if you go to your light and then you go to the shader editor, click use nodes. Also, I gotta make sure I'm in object. You can set an emission as your color and then put in a black body node. And then now if I set this to like 4500, for example, it's going to look more like sunset or something. So I'm just going to put that back. So yeah, this is the main light, my key light. I have it set to 1 degree, basically the spread, because sunlight is so far away that it basically is parallel sun rays by the time it gets to you. So it makes these really sharp lines as opposed to like a softbox or something that might be more diffused, like a 90 degree. And it's just the light's kind of going everywhere. So I leave that set at 1. That's the first light in the scene outside of your HDRI. And then the next light that I'm using is this fill light. I just kind of wanted to put some color back in this concrete. I did want it to be moody, but it was just really, really dark without this fill light back there. So I'm using a fill light to bounce some of that light in. And then this last light is kind of an interesting technique. I made this super simple label in Canva, just found some icons, set this up. But you can see I've got my light set up, but this metallic embossing really just isn't standing out at all. So I'm using this light, which is a label light, is what I named it, or labeled it. So all it is I turned the spread down a little bit to about 45, and then I gave it a constraint. So if you go to your constraints, you can add a constraint. This is such a good technique. You really need to know how to use this. I gave it a track 2 constraint and then plugged in that glass body into there. And what that basically does is no matter where I move this light, it's always going to be focused on that label. And then all I did was rotate this around until I started getting a little bit of highlighting on my label and even on my bottle a little bit. I kind of liked having this highlight here. And so what that really does is it helps that to pop out and stand out from the rest of the glass. So that is a key important thing. A lot of times you'll strategically be placing lights, especially for things that are very metallic or very low roughness. They're going to basically show up as black if there's not some light source out there that's bouncing off to show what that is. So I would definitely recommend, when you get your product where you want it, don't be afraid or shy of placing lights in, tracking them to the specific area that you want, and you can rotate them around. There's tons of add-ons that do that also, but I really like the control of doing it manually. So the other thing I would say to talk about in lighting is this plane back here. I'm actually not really using it. I think I could just delete it. But I am using this bounce card to essentially bounce some light off back from the key light and from this fill light. And basically all I'm doing there is replicating, like maybe you set this up, but then the window's coming in, maybe there's a wall on this side and it would be bouncing light back, because without that thing, it really is darker in that area. You can see how much light, if I hide that and unhide that, it's kind of providing back. So I did like that, because this is providing light that's stronger here as it comes across, but then this is bouncing back some of that to kind of help that be there. So yeah, that's the entire lighting for this setup. It's 3 lights. 1 replicating your key light, 1 for a fill light, 1 to highlight that label, and then using an HDRI to kind of overall, again, if I set that to 0, just basically some overall lighting for the scene. So yeah, that is basically all the modeling, all the camera setup that we did, and the lighting. So let's talk about the materials real quick. So the only thing that I would note on the materials is I'm using some from Grayscale Gorilla. I'm using one of their pitted concrete. Let me just search for it. First of all, I'm just also demonstrating how cool their stuff is. Pitted concrete. I have tons of these options. I love the detail in some of these. I can't remember which one I did. I think it might have been one of these two. But yeah, you can also go find a concrete texture from Ambient CG, from lots of different places. If you don't have access to Grayscale Gorilla, it's totally fine. Use the Node Wrangler add-on. There's tons of videos out there about how to set up the material. The one thing that I did want to talk about is modeling this product if you don't have it, and some tweaks that I made to these materials. So first of all, if you don't have a model, you can go to places like, for example, I have the Blender Kit add-on. If I just search for a perfume bottle, they have a free version that has lots of cool stuff. You can go grab any product, pull it in, if you're just working on your lighting and your texturing and your rendering. But if you wanted to model something like this shape, what I would do is, let's just go over here to the side. A super quick way to do this is we're just going to do Shift A and add in a mesh cube. I'm just going to scale it down roughly like this. I would tab into edit mode, scale it in the Y so that you're basically getting that shape. And then this looks like it's not totally a square, so I'm going to do SZ and just kind of bring it down slightly. And then to get you these rounded edges, these Grayscale Gorilla models are way more detailed, but if you just wanted to do a rough practice or a placeholder, I would add a bevel modifier. I would set this to something a lot lower. Something like that. Set this to 6, so now you're getting that kind of rough shape. And then what I would do is add a solidify modifier. And if I just solo this by hitting the backslash and do Alt Z, you can't go too far if you're doing it before your bevels. Matter of fact, you might even be able to bring this up here. Nice. Okay. So now you can play with your solidify, how thick you want that glass to be. I would do something probably like this for me, not too thick. And then I would apply both of these modifiers. So do Control A, But another little trick I'm going to show you here is the normals of your faces, which is basically what Blender is expecting to be outward or facing the camera essentially. If you go up here to your overlays, there's a button for face orientation, which I have added to my quick favorites. So if I do Q and then face orientation, blue is good, red is bad, which I'm pretty sure is flipped from Cinema 4D, no pun intended, flip normals. But blue is what we're wanting. So if I tab into this and I do L to grab this outer thickness of the glass and hide it, you're going to see that the inside of the glass, or the inside of the glass material, is basically blue inside and not outside. And for Blender to calculate it correctly, we need to grab it, do Alt-N to bring up your normals menu, and then flip it. And now if I do Alt-H, I can now see, okay, if I look at the outside, do Alt-H. If I just look at the outside by grabbing, this set of faces, it's all blue and the inside is blue too. And then we also need some liquid to make this look like there's something in there. So I would hide this outer edge or this outer shell. I would grab this and then Shift D to duplicate it. And then while you have it selected, scale it up slightly. And then we're gonna do P, separate by selection. And then basically what that is now inside of our glass, it's gonna be a little difficult to see, but the liquid extends just outside of the glass, and that is what you really have to do to make the inside of this bottle calculate and look realistic. So now if you set this up with a glass material for the outside, and then you just take your liquid and you give it a new material and you just turn that transmission up to 1, and then I would also change the IOR to something like, I think it's 1.333. I think it's 1.5 and 1.33 for glass and liquid. So I would just double check that. But yeah, and then outside of that, if you grab this top face and we did Shift S, cursor just selected, and we just add in a couple cylinders. So mesh cylinder, scale everything down, GZ, something like that. Might even make it a little bit bigger. And then we can just literally duplicate that, Shift D, scale it in the Z. And yeah, that's basically your shape. And then you could add your texture, and we could do that later. But yeah, I would probably grab this one, throw on a bevel modifier, set this to something low. I mean, honestly, that looks pretty cool. And if you did that, you could just throw on another bevel modifier and set it to super low. And then right click shade auto smooth. And now you've got this cool little, that's a neat little detail. So, but for me, I would probably just delete that second one, make the first one like that, and then we're good to go. I'm gonna turn off this face orientation as well. Okay, so yeah, that's how I would model this bottle real quickly. It would have liquid inside. You could set your glass to be a glass material. But like I said, if you're working on your lighting, your texturing, feel free to just go grab one and bring it into your scene. So I'm gonna delete all of that. I'm gonna unslash here and just bring everything back. So the only other thing that I want to talk about for materials is all of these concrete cubes have the same concrete texture applied. And what would happen is we would see repetition pretty quickly if you didn't change up the UVs for each of these. And so what I did, Grayscale or Cinema 4D has, I think, a jitter node or something that you can use to kind of offset that. But in the shader editor for these, all I did was, because each of these cubes is a separate object, I just used the random value from each object to drive the location. No control over this, don't even know how the math works out. I just know that it's gonna change the mapping for each set of UVs in a random way. And you could probably like throw in a math multiply node, math, and you'd set this to like multiply. If it was not changing it enough for you, you could probably throw this in here. You can play around with it, but basically what it does is when you look at this scene, now each set of concrete textures is slightly adjusted so that they're not all looking the same, which is a pretty good little trick. I also cranked up the normal map to 2, a strength of 2, and it doesn't make a huge difference. If I zoom in over here, if I change this to 2, it basically just kind of highlights and makes the depth map almost essentially of your concrete texture stand out a little bit more. I liked how it looked, so I went with it. I wanted to kind of get some more texture and not have a lot of whitewashed, kind of smooth feeling materials in there. Okay, let me run through some stuff. Oh yeah, let's talk about real quickly the camera. Instead of using a camera with a super long focal length, I actually turned this to orthographic, so change it to an orthographic perspective, and then you basically just have to like change this scale to be what it's supposed to be. I'm gonna put that back. I thought this looked cool. A lot of renders nowadays have a super long focal length, and I'm replicating that with this orthographic perspective. And then also I have depth of field enabled. So to do that in my camera collection, I just do Shift A and I add in an empty plane axis, bring it to where you want your focal plane to be. And then you would just go to your camera, select it, go to the camera, and then turn on depth of field and then set that focus object. And I have this set up in my default startup Blender file just so I don't have to do it every single time. And then, yeah, if you are doing orthographic, the f-stop numbers aren't really realistic. And a lot of times if you have a scene that's not real world scale in Blender, the f-stop breaks down pretty quickly. I think Cinema 4D and 3ds Max, some of those things are a lot stronger in the way that they handle their f-stop. So a lot of times this is more artistic than photorealistic. So just do the amount that you want to have. So, I can set this to 0 or 500, whatever the number would be. And make it super clear, but for me, I liked where it was at 125. I liked the bokeh and the depth of field I was getting, so that's where I set mine. But then, yeah, if you changed it to a regular perspective camera, a lot of times it will be a more realistic value. So, okay, we talked about the camera setup. We talked about our modeling a quick product or using one. I do want to talk about the texture real quick for this. So, on these models, there is glass. And then there's the inside liquid, which is the exact same thing as I showed you. It's a thickness with the normals facing outward on both sets. And then your liquid is intersecting your glass so that it will calculate correctly. For the shader for this, all I did was I went to Canva and I found some icons that I liked. Just needed something on this glass. And basically all I'm doing is I have two materials for this glass, the outer glass. There's a glass shader and then there is just a regular metallic shader for the logo. And then all I have here is a quick mask that I made and said, hey, put this mask on the front, and then that is going to just tell you between these two, which to do. So that's kind of how I did that. And then if you just plug that back in, that's how that works. The only other thing that I did tweak, and I'll show you on the render view, which I'll look at here in a second, I did use some smudges to kind of just make the glass a little bit more realistic. All I'm using there is, you can go find tons of smudges or roughness textures online. I'm using the ones from Grayscale Gorilla again because they're amazing. I love them. I changed the scale on it to kind of fit it to the size of the perfume bottle, and then I used a color ramp to kind of adjust how much of the roughness I wanted to change. And then, yeah, I'm using the glass material for this green glass, and then this, metallic shader basically for the label. Okay. And I think that's basically everything in the scene. We talked about our cameras. We talked about our product. We talked about the environment, the HDRI, how I made those cubes. The lighting, very simple, 3 of those. And so, yeah, that's basically the entirety of the pre-rendering workflow. For me, I'm using cycles. I messed around with some different versions of rendering this out. I was kind of curious about the detail in this concrete, if my denoiser was really mudding that up. And I also was curious about how the threshold and noise threshold would affect it. So typically what I'll usually leave this as is 0.01, which I think is the Blender default. I usually leave it around 500 samples. That's probably where I'd recommend you starting, especially if you have a powerful enough graphic card. I'm using the optics denoiser because I have an NVIDIA graphics card. So yeah, that's what I rendered it out as. And then feel free to, when you're doing your rendering, for stills, a few seconds doesn't matter as much, but definitely check your samples and your noise threshold and optimize those if you have to do a long animation, because by the time you start stacking those up over 300 frames, 400 frames, 1,000 frames, that time adds up really quickly. So, okay, the last thing I want to talk about really quickly is my post-production stuff. So let's look, first of all, this is the render that came straight out of Blender. Looks really good, and in this one you can definitely see these smudges a lot more. I probably should have toned this down a little bit. I always tend to overdo it, but I loved the detail it was giving me, kind of helping these not just feel CGI. And then, yeah, I like the look of everything so far, but then if I swap to the colored version, the post-produced version essentially, you can see basically what I'm doing there is I warmed up the light a little bit to kind of replicate some more midday, a little bit warmer sunlight. I'm using a little bit of film grain. I'm also kind of bringing up the highlights, because if this is truly sunlight, there should be a lot more, difference in what's in direct sunlight versus in what seems to be shadows. So I cranked that up a little bit. It might be a little overkill, but kind of just comes down to artistically what you want the image to look like. So yeah, I would love to make a video on some post-production tips. I'm seeing more and more that there is so much that goes into the colors and the overall lighting and feel of the image from that. So yeah, hopefully you enjoyed this type of video. I would love to get some feedback on if this kind of overview knowledge sharing type video is more helpful, or if you want to go back to more of the step-by-step, hey, here's what I did, every single detail. These are a lot easier to make because a lot of times I can use projects that I'm working on and then just make a 30-45 minute video talking over them. So yeah, hopefully let me know what you think. Feel free to shoot me a message on Instagram. Leave a comment on this video on some ideas of what you'd like to see in the future. If you have any questions about anything that I didn't cover, please let me know. I hope you enjoyed this video. Hope you learned something from it. And with that, we will see you in the next video.